Stop. What you're about to hear didn't happen in a courtroom. It didn't happen in a boardroom. It happened at 35,000 feet in the air. A private jet, powerful executives, and one calm black CEO no one bothered to recognize. When a flight attendant decided to put him in his place, she crossed a line so fast, no one had time to react. She slapped him. Not a warning, not an argument, a slap. The cabin froze. Phones stopped. Hearts raced. Everyone expected him to explode, to demand security, to ruin her career on the spot. But he didn't. He sat down, pulled out his phone, and stayed silent. And in the next 10 minutes, the power in that aircraft would shift so hard that an entire leadership team would lose their jobs, and one woman would walk off that jet with nothing left. This isn't just a story about disrespect. It's about assuming power, misjudging silence, and learning, far too late, that real authority doesn't need to shout. Stay with me, because what happened next changed everything. No one expects chaos at 35,000 feet. The private jet cruised smoothly above the clouds, its cabin filled with soft engine hums and low executive chatter. Leather seats, polished wood panels, and crystal-clear windows reflected a world of wealth and control. On board were high-powered executives, corporate lawyers, and one man who stood out without trying: Marcus Ellison. Marcus was a black tech CEO whose name carried weight in boardrooms across the country. He didn't flash wealth or demand attention. His tailored suit was simple. His voice was calm. His confidence was quiet, the kind built from years of discipline, not ego. From the moment the jet doors closed, tension followed the flight attendant, Rachel. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor as she moved through the aisle, jaw tight, eyes scanning the cabin. She carried herself like someone who believed control was everything. When Marcus politely asked for sparkling water, his tone respectful and relaxed, Rachel stopped cold. "Sir, you'll have to wait like everyone else," she snapped, louder than necessary. The cabin fell into an awkward silence. Several passengers looked up. One executive raised an eyebrow. Another shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The response felt unnecessary, almost personal. Marcus met her gaze and smiled. "No problem at all," he said calmly, returning to his seat. But the tension didn't fade. A few minutes later, Marcus stood near the aisle to stretch his legs. It was a harmless movement, nothing disruptive, nothing rude. Yet Rachel's expression hardened as she noticed. She stormed toward him, her face flushed with irritation. "You don't get to walk around my jet," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the cabin noise. Marcus turned, surprised but composed. Before he could respond, it happened. Rachel raised her hand and slapped him across the face. The sound cracked through the cabin like a gunshot. Gasps erupted. Conversations died instantly. Phones froze mid-scroll. A lawyer dropped his pen. Someone whispered, "Did that just happen?" Marcus stood still. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He didn't raise a hand in return. Slowly, deliberately, he adjusted his cufflinks, straightened his jacket, and looked directly at Rachel. His voice was steady, low, and controlled, far more unsettling than anger. He spoke just 5 words. "You just made a mistake." And in that moment, though no one realized it yet, everything on that jet had already changed. The longest 10 minutes of Rachel's life had begun, though she didn't know it yet. Rachel stood frozen in the aisle, chest rising and falling fast, adrenaline still buzzing through her veins. She waited for the moment she was certain would come. Security stepping in, voices raised, fingers pointed at him. In her mind, this situation had already been decided. He had crossed a line. She had enforced order. But nothing happened. Instead, Marcus calmly returned to his seat. No argument. No complaint. He didn't even look back at her. He simply sat down, reached into his jacket, and pulled out his phone. That unsettled her. The cabin grew uncomfortably quiet. No one spoke. Even the soft hum of the jet seemed louder now. Marcus's thumbs moved steadily across his screen. Slow, deliberate, precise. Whatever he was typing, it wasn't rushed. No shouting. No accusations. No emotional outburst. Just silence and typing. The executives seated nearby began exchanging uneasy glances. They knew Marcus well. They had sat across from him in negotiations, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They had watched him remain calm while others panicked. One man leaned closer and whispered, barely moving his lips, "She has no idea who he is, does she?" Another quietly shook his head. "None. Not a clue." Rachel noticed the whispers, but misread them completely. To her, the silence felt like victory. She straightened her shoulders and allowed herself a small, confident smirk. In her mind, she had proven who was in charge. This was her aircraft. She had seniority. She had authority. Or so she believed. She adjusted her uniform and turned away, convinced the situation was over. She had no idea that those 10 minutes were not about cooling tempers, but about confirmation. Marcus wasn't texting a friend. He wasn't calling a lawyer. He was documenting everything. What Rachel didn't know, what she couldn't see, was that Marcus Ellison wasn't just another wealthy passenger who needed to be put in his place. He was the majority owner of the aviation company that operated this jet, and the people sitting quietly around him, they weren't random travelers. They weren't observers. They were his executive leadership team, watching in silence as the consequences quietly took shape. And when those 10 minutes ended, the balance of power on that aircraft was about to shift, permanently. Exactly 10 minutes later, Marcus Ellison stood up. The subtle movement alone was enough to silence the cabin. Conversations stopped mid-thought. Every eye shifted toward him as he adjusted his jacket and stepped into the aisle. The calm confidence he carried now felt heavier, deliberate. He looked at Rachel, not with anger, not with revenge in his eyes, but with something far more unsettling, clarity. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said evenly, his voice carrying without effort, "I believe introductions are overdue." The executives straightened in their seats. They knew what was coming. Marcus turned slightly, addressing the entire cabin. "My name is Marcus Ellison," he said. "I'm the founder and CEO of Ellison Global Ventures." A murmur rippled through the jet. Rachel's confident posture collapsed. The color drained from her face, so fast it looked like someone had pulled the plug. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Marcus continued, his tone steady, controlled. "This jet is leased through my company. Every executive seated here works directly for me, except one person." He paused. Then he looked directly at Rachel. The air felt suddenly thin, like the cabin had lost oxygen. "For the past 6 months," Marcus said, "I've been reviewing internal reports. Complaints about unprofessional conduct, abuse of authority, discrimination disguised as procedure." Rachel swallowed hard. "I wanted to understand the culture from the inside," he continued. "Not from reports, not from filtered emails, from real experience." The weight of his words pressed down on the room. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. Rachel finally found her voice. I didn't know," she stammered, her earlier confidence completely gone. "If I had known who you were." Marcus raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Exactly," he said quietly. He took a step closer, his voice still calm, but final. "You didn't know who I was. And that's the point." He let the silence linger. "How you treated me had nothing to do with my behavior," Marcus continued. "It had everything to do with your assumptions." Rachel's eyes darted around the cabin, searching for support. She found none. The executives stared forward, expressions tight. They knew what this moment meant. "This wasn't a misunderstanding," Marcus said. "It was a revelation." And in that instant, everyone on board understood something unmistakably clear. This flight was no longer about getting from one destination to another. It was about truth, accountability, and consequences. And they were about to land hard. Rachel's composure shattered. Desperation flashed across her face as she tried to grab back the authority she felt slipping through her fingers. Her voice rose, sharp and frantic, cutting through the stunned silence of the cabin. "I don't care who you are," she shouted. "I'm filing a report. You're all off this flight, every single one of you." A few heads turned. No one moved. Rachel had made one final, fatal mistake. She mistook volume for power. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply looked at her, calm and unmoved, as if the decision had already been made long before this moment. "You don't have that authority anymore," he said quietly. The words landed heavier than a scream. Rachel froze. Marcus turned slightly toward the front of the cabin. "Miss Carter," he said, addressing his assistant, who had been silently observing everything. "Terminate the executive flight management team." A pause. Effective immediately. The cabin erupted in gasps. One executive leaned back slowly, disbelief written across his face. Another rubbed his forehead, already understanding the consequences. Rachel let out a short, nervous laugh. "You can't do that," she said, though her voice trembled. "This isn't how it works." Marcus met her eyes and nodded once. "It already has," he replied. He took a breath and addressed the cabin again. "This team received multiple reports," he said. "They ignored them. They minimized them. And instead of correcting behavior, they protected it." His gaze returned to Rachel. "They empowered someone who believed control mattered more than character, and silence mattered more than accountability." Rachel's hands shook at her sides. The authority she had clung to was gone. The uniform that once gave her confidence now felt heavy, almost useless. Marcus's voice lowered. "As for you," he said calmly, "assault is not a customer service policy. No insults, no threats, just truth." When the jet touched down, there was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting, no excuses. Security was already waiting. Rachel was escorted off the aircraft in complete silence, eyes down, heels echoing faintly against the runway floor. The same cabin that once amplified her power now watched her exit without a word. And just like that, everything she thought she controlled was gone. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it doesn't raise its voice. Sometimes it doesn't wear a badge or demand attention. Sometimes power sits quietly, watching, waiting. Marcus Ellison never shouted. He never demanded an apology. He never tried to embarrass anyone in return. He understood something many people never learn. True power doesn't need to perform. Instead of reacting emotionally, Marcus followed 5 simple steps that changed everything in less than an hour. First, he stayed calm. While others expected anger, he chose control. His silence wasn't weakness, it was discipline. Second, he observed. Marcus paid attention not just to the slap, but to the reactions around him. Who spoke up? Who stayed silent? Who looked away? Culture reveals itself in moments of crisis. Third, he confirmed the truth. He didn't assume. He documented. He validated patterns he had already suspected. One moment became proof of a much bigger problem. Fourth, he acted decisively. No speeches. No delays. When the truth was clear, so was the response. Leadership means choosing action over comfort. Fifth, he restored balance. Not revenge. Not humiliation. Just accountability. That day, an entire leadership team lost their positions, not because of a single slap, but because they allowed a system where disrespect could exist unchecked. The slap was only the symptom. The culture was the disease. And Rachel, she learned a lesson far greater than any turbulence a plane could face. That authority without character is empty. That assumptions can destroy careers. That respect isn't optional, it's foundational. Because in the real world, you never truly know who you're dealing with. So never judge power by appearance. Never mistake silence for weakness. And never forget this final truth. Respect costs nothing, but disrespect can cost everything. And at 35,000 feet, that lesson landed harder than any plane ever could. This story isn't really about a slap. It's about what happens when people confuse authority with superiority, when silence is mistaken for weakness, and when respect is treated as optional. Marcus Ellison never raised his voice, yet he changed lives, careers, and an entire culture in minutes. Because real power doesn't announce itself. It observes. It waits. And when it acts, it's final. So remember this. You never know who you're dealing with. Respect costs nothing. But disrespect? It can cost everything. If this story made you think, hit like, subscribe, and share. Because lessons like this deserve to travel far beyond 35,000 feet.